Our next scheduled speaker is Roger Penrose. I'm not sure if Roger is here. There is a Roger. Let me unmute you. Is this Roger Penrose?
I hope so. But you can hear me, can you?
Yes.
Oh, good. No, well, as a co-Britishman, British subject, I don't know if that makes much difference, but I used to know him when he was in England, in Cambridge. He always used to give lectures which were extraordinarily popular. All the undergraduates and non-mathematicians too were always, I mean, everything he did was fun. I think that was one of the greatest things about him. He was a very distinguished mathematician as well in group theory. I was not somebody who knew a great deal of that work in that detailed work that he was doing there, but I knew he was very distinguished, and I knew him as a puzzler and a fun mathematician in many ways. I think one of the things, let me mention one particular puzzle. I was given a version of this by my brother Oliver, I think for my birthday one time. He had several of these. I think I don't know for every odd number you can do it, but you take an odd number greater than 1 anyway, and you make a cube. So let's say 5 by 5 by 5. I think the one he gave me. And then you have pieces which fill this, they're 5 little cubes. And then you have all the others are made up of that shape. I think there must have been, I've just lost track of how many pieces there were altogether, but they're all just rectangular pieces. It's completely trivial, you say. And you put them in the box, and if you don't know what you're doing, it's impossible. You have to know what you're doing because it has a diagonal symmetry. Of course, the box doesn't show that because you lift the top off and you don't think about the diagonal symmetry. But you have to put the little cubes all along the diagonal, and then you can fit all the other ones around with its symmetry. And I gave one to a small child, which was 3 by 3 by 3, and I don't think he could do it, which was quite extraordinary. But anyway, I always had a great respect for him and the elegance of what he was doing. Everybody knows about the game of life and all that, which was done with very, very simple rules, and you can make it do all sorts of things like make a Turing machine and things like that out of it. I knew him first, I think, in Cambridge probably. Maybe it was I think let me mention one thing, which was when I met him at a conference, one of the British Mathematical Colloquium conference. They had these conferences every year, and I think I'd come in rather late or something, and I tried to get them to squeeze me in a talk on something I just thought of, and they wouldn't do that. But at least I talked to John about it, and I had these 2 little shapes, which were kites and darts, with a certain matching rule, and it would only tile the plane non-periodically. So he picked up on this very quickly, and this wasn't published anywhere, but he went to see Martin Gardner, and the first publication was this article by Martin Gardner, which was based on conversations that he'd had with John. And it was a very good article. And it was the first time these tiles became known by anybody. It was a thing which I played around with a lot later. I don't know how much time I've got, but let me mention the last time I met him. I think it was the last time, which was probably, I think, about 4 years ago in Princeton. He wasn't terribly well, I remember. And we talked about our respective proofs of Morley's trisector theorem. This is the theorem we have any old triangle, we trisect all the angles, and then where they meet, they make a little triangle in the middle, which is equilateral. Very remarkable result. And he had a very elegant proof of this, which he showed me. And I said, well, I have a proof too. Mine is simpler, but yours is much more elegant. Mine wasn't elegant at all, but you start from the triangle, and you build up the thing, and you can do it without much thinking. But that was really the last time I think I saw him, and it was a great shame because I always gained so much from talking to him. As I say, everything was fun. He always had a different angle on things that you'd never think of. And he was an amazing mathematician as well as an amazing puzzlist. I think, as puzzles go, I would think this one with the different rectangular shapes is such a simple thing, but yet difficult. I think I'd pick that out as a particularly elegant puzzle. Let me leave it at that. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak about him. He was a wonderful man.
Thank you so much for joining us, Roger, and thank you for those stories. Next, we have Doris Schattschneider. You ready, Doris?
Yes, I am. I, like most of you, have many anecdotes, but I'm only going to tell you two. And actually, I'm going to follow up on something Roger just mentioned. I first met John in 1976 when he came to a conference on recreational mathematics at Miami University in Ohio. This was in September 1976. He had come directly from being with Martin Gardner in New York at Martin's home. And he said he was literally held hostage by Martin for a week so that Martin could pump him from getting all the information he could about the Penrose tilings, the aperiodic tilings. And so John had come fresh from that hostage situation at Martin Gardner's house. And of course, later that all that information became part of Martin's column in the January 1977 issue of Scientific American. So John gave a talk, and he did it in John style with quickly drawn images on acetate sheets using an overhead projector. And the talk was great. People loved it. But what I really remember most about that conference and John is later in the day when there was a break, out on the grass, out on the lawn, there lay John, belly down, flopped on the grass, and around him were all these students, probably a dozen, literally all head to head, like human spokes in a wheel. And John had gathered them, or they had gathered to John, just like a moth goes to light. And John was in his element. And that was the first time I saw how John was just a magnet to other people. He delighted in it, they delighted in him. And I called him a Pied Piper for mathematics. And that was the first time I saw it in action. A second anecdote is much more personal. Shortly after my book on Escher's work on symmetry, I talked with John, and he had gotten a copy. And he told me when he got the copy, he just really wanted to gobble it up. And then he said, no, I decided I couldn't do that. I was going to ration myself. So he said he put it on the piano and he allowed himself to only turn one page a day. And so, thank you, John. What a compliment. That's what I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Doris. Next on the schedule is Derek Smith.
Hi, everyone. I'm Derek Smith. I'm a professor at Lafayette College and a student of John's at Princeton. Big thanks to BAAM for organizing this event. It's wonderful. I was lucky to be his student and even luckier to work with him on a book on quaternions and octonions right after finishing my PhD. He was a great mentor and friend. Several years ago, we went back to work on the book, hoping to prepare a second edition. We'd only gotten a little ways into it when I had to deal with a pretty heavy teaching load at Lafayette and couldn't visit Princeton regularly. And he got pulled into some other projects like his wonderful biography. I'm so happy that came to fruition. And later his health declined, so we never got back to it. So the memories that are most vivid for me weren't about any serious mathematical work, but were the times that we shared some good laughs together with our families. His visits to Lafayette, often with Diana and Gareth, when Gareth were young, were really special. And so I want to share one of those now, and if there's time, I've got another anecdote. So one time he stayed overnight to give a lunchtime talk at Lafayette the next day. And he was up the morning before well before I was. And he left the house, and he didn't tell me where he was. And these were the days before cell phones could easily track you down. So I did find him at, where else? One of the 3 local coffee shops, the third one I checked. And he had a stack of papers out on the table, and several of the sheets were covered with graphs. And so these graphs, it turned out, represented positions of a wooden sliding puzzle he was then obsessed with. And so a wooden sliding puzzle looks like this. I don't know that it was the one that he was investigating, but it's one where you have some wooden pieces, contained in a board, and then one of them, if you move the pieces around enough, will hopefully, if you're clever, then slide out because it's thinner than the rest. And again, I don't remember if that was the one. But what he'd done is he basically had a node on the graph represent a position that the puzzle could be in, and then an edge join 2 of these nodes if you could get from one to the other by a simple move. And each graph had 60 vertices. It was the same graph represented on different sheets of paper and at least twice as many edges. It was a pretty complicated graph, and there were some edges going off the top and around the sides, coming back through the bottom. And over the course of 2 or 3 hours, he created about 7 or 8 of these graphs, and they were much like each one was much like the previous one, except what he did is he took 5 or 10 of the vertices at the top, and then he moved them to the bottom, and he was hoping he could, kind of reconfigure the edges and their placement better. And I don't really know what he was trying to do. I don't know what he was going for, except maybe a better presentation of this graph and understanding some components of it. So we got up to leave, and he had to give a talk in half an hour. And I grabbed the stacks and looked at the first graph he'd drawn and the last one, and they were essentially identical. I mean, you couldn't hold them up to the light, but everything was in the same spot, edges, everything. And so he'd been working at this furiously for 3 hours, and I told him he'd just spent 3 hours getting back to the starting point, and he smiled quickly, and then we just laughed for several minutes and paid for our breakfast and left. And was it a waste of time? No. What it was to me is just a perfect example of his focus and tenacity, which served him so well on many of the important mathematics problems he was working on, but also on the analysis of sliding puzzles and games and anything that sparked his curiosity, because the investigation was the thing. It wasn't where he was headed. But it was also an example of him taking 2 or 3 steps beyond what the reasonable person would do. And he often said that was an important guiding principle for him. And when several times to me, he said I was being too reasonable. And if that comes from some people, that's a compliment, but it's certainly not a compliment if it comes from John. One last anecdote, I may have a little time, but we were working one day on the book, and we were creating some tables of groups, and he wrote down something I didn't understand. He was at the board, I was taking notes, and I thought about it, and he kept going. A minute later, I stopped him and said, "John, what happened there?" And he said, "Oh, that's cohomology." And I said, "Okay." And then 2 minutes passed, and I said, "John, we haven't used cohomology anywhere in the book before." And he said, "Oh, cohomology is what I say when I don't really understand what's going on." So it's kind of a question. I'm throwing this question out. Has he ever used that with anybody else? I'd love to know that was a standard thing that he did. Oh, even better if he just came up with it on the fly. But let me know if he's used cohomology for things he doesn't understand before. So anyway, thanks, John, for the many good lessons and memories, and may you rest in play. And I guess Tim's up next. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Tim, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. So I do want to confirm that what Derek said, that yes, and something that was sufficiently nonsense. Yes, Conway would call it cohomology. And actually, I do want to thank BAAM, a different BAM here, for organizing this wonderful event. And actually, I'm going to embarrass Derek now, because I want to thank him and Alex Reba and Psychoshin and Joe Cohn and all the other folks that I'm sure there are many other people here who really were great companions to John in the last years of his life. And so there, Derek, I did it to you. Actually, I do want to thank BAA. Should I go now, or is it actually? Can somebody tell me? Are you seeing me, or because I was going to do the knock trick.
Yes, Tim, we can see you.
Okay. So, I was trying to figure out how, in just a few minutes, I could convey what it was like to be a Conway student, what it was like to talk to him every day. And so it's kind of like this. And those of you who have seen this will immediately recognize what's about to happen. It's sort of like you'd be talking to him and just be sort of ordinary. You're trying to follow along what he's doing, and a miracle would appear. And and for those of you, if anybody, is there anybody who has never seen this? Yeah. So anyway, so if you didn't know, of course, this is impossible. But because with the rope, I form a closed circle which cannot possibly knot itself without disruption. Anyway, so you'd be talking with them, and suddenly the impossible would happen. And actually, and of course, there was always a lot of showmanship to it. So if you want to learn, I think I'm going to actually try to teach this trick in a minute. But if you want to learn, the things he told me how to sell it is that here's how he would always do it. He would loop over like this and say, now he'd always have some sort of patsy helping him along with this, and he would say, "Do as I do."
No way.
Yes, so do as I do, and then and now reach through here. Yes, reach through here, and then of course I just messed it up, but you can sort of see. And the important thing there is, especially if you mess it up like I just did, is to sell it by looking at your right hand and looking at the knot down here. So there was always a lot of showmanship involved in dealing with Conway. But now I feel that I was thinking about this. I haven't seen a whole lot of people do this, and it is also true that I have to say, on social media, I saw Tim Gowers say that, I saw somebody, Conway did this knot trick for me once, and for the life of me, I couldn't figure out, and I wish can somebody tell me the trick? And so, and then this is actually in Lewis Kaufman's book on knots, but and I know there's a professional magician here to whom I apologize for messing it up the second time I did it. But is it reasonable for me to try to teach everybody the trick now?
I think we're okay on time, Timothy. If you want to try, yeah.
So let me teach you the trick. So you hold this in your right hand, and you loop over to your left hand. There's a hole. You want to make a big hole in the middle, and you reach through, and you pull back, and then I hope you can see there's this state where in your left hand. So so if you really want to learn this, go. I guess you'd want to go look at this on YouTube later. But there's a state where you have this sort of caught loop on your left hand, and then you pass it through, and that's where the knot is created in your left hand. So anyway, it really was. So just to show you again, it really was wonderful being a Conway student. Life was like this every day. A little bit of the impossible, and so thanks to him, and thanks to everybody for being here at this lovely event.
Thank you, Tim. And I'm sorry about those technical problems. Most people are all but the speaker are supposed to be muted, so I'm not sure how the screen got set to the wrong speaker there. But please don't interrupt the current speaker. Next up is Aaron Siegel. Aaron, are you ready?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. So for those of you who don't know me, I was a PhD student of Elwyn Berlekamp, studying combinatorial game theory, and continue to be actively interested in the subject. And of course, for anyone studying combinatorial games, John was a defining influence. He was one of the founding fathers of the modern subject, along with Berlekamp and Richard Guy. And he was the discoverer of the axiomatic theory of partisan games and of the surreal numbers. I had the pleasure of meeting him on a number of occasions. I didn't know him as well as many of you, but I did have the opportunity to spend some time with him in the 2006 to 07 academic year when I was doing postdoctoral work at Princeton. And he, shortly after I arrived in Princeton, he had a fairly serious stroke and ended up in the hospital. And I'd visit him regularly in the hospital. We were working on trying to understand a game he'd invented called MEM, and was just struck by, he just had a stroke, but his mathematical enthusiasm and imagination didn't suffer in the least. It turned out to be a game where it's fairly easy to calculate the values and it's easy to identify patterns, but unexpectedly difficult to prove anything about it. And so I'd bring him a stack of printouts of computations each time I visited him. And he'd sit there just intensely scrutinizing, finding some new patterns, and then demand more output on my next visit. And after he was discharged, I continued to visit him once a week at his home in Princeton. And of course, I always wanted to talk about games, but it seemed like every week he had a different topic he wanted to talk about. Sometimes it was set theory or geometry. And I was really struck by what a singularly imaginative mathematician he was, and how wide-ranging his mathematical imagination was. I'll say one other thing. I think I had the pleasure of spending time with John and Elwyn together on a number of occasions, and I think it would be hard to find two personalities that are more different. And I think there were frictions there that have been well documented. But what always struck me when I observed them together was just how much they respected one another, just the mutual reverence. I think Conway, he left his stamp on a huge range of mathematical subjects. And I think some of the other topics he contributed to might be, more widely recognized by a broader community. But I do believe games and surreal numbers were among his proudest achievements. I'm going to close with a quote from Conway. And he said, quote, and this was from a lecture he delivered in, I believe, 1999. He said, "I used to feel guilty in Cambridge that I spent all day playing games while I was supposed to be doing mathematics. Then, when I discovered surreal numbers, I realized that playing games is mathematics." And I think that's it's an inspiration and a reminder to the rest of us, really, to just have fun and follow our passions. And we never know where they might lead. And thank you so much to BAAM and the organizers for putting this event together and having me here.
Thank you, Aaron. That's a great quote and a great sentiment to end on for us all to keep in mind.